case, this is a state of emergency.
We feel for these people, but there's got to be a better way. Immediate response by the city is absolutely needed.
Some neighbors right there asking some questions on Fox 13 News about a new unauthorized encampment of asylum seekers in a Seattle City park. How's that situation heating up for local leadership? Plus, what does a transportation levy that's now even bigger than before tell us? And also, what's next in an ongoing investigation of sexual harassment within the Seattle Police Department? We've got some big questions cooking around the city of Seattle this week, and we are answering them here, I should say, on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine, and I am joined by my co-host, David Croman, who is the City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I just wanted to ask this one question. How do you feel about Shug, that zebra who went galloping away from her owners around North Bend last week? Are you happy she's with her owners again? Or are you a bit upset that we don't have this continuing supply of really good meme fodder to use? What do you think?
Well, I'm happy that, because I think zebras can be kind of dangerous. I'm happy that she didn't.
They're mean.
Cause any harm or anything, and that those memes didn't turn dark really quickly. So I suppose I'm happy that it was captured and is off to wherever it was going. I guess a petting zoo. I don't remember what the destination was.
Yeah, zebras on the loose raise all sorts of questions, doesn't it? Well, thank you, David, as always, for joining me. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. You'll find them on the first floor of City Hall. And a special thanks to the patrons who keep the show going, like Leon. Leon, thank you so much for your support. Also, thank you for continuing to interact with the show. Become a patron, folks, and you'll get access to patrons first content before anybody else. We'll answer your questions on the show. We'll even throw in a sporty decal from Seattle News, Views, and Brews, just $5 a month. Great deal right there. Find the show on Patreon at Seattle News, Views, and Brews. A big thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. Here we go, right here, right now. Okay, some quick feedback on current events going on out there. You have more time now to give your feedback on the comprehensive plan. That deadline extended to May 20th. A heads up there. We're also tracking the police hiring legislation, the delivery driver wages legislation working its way through the council. But here and now, we have an unauthorized encampment of asylum seekers in a Seattle City park. It's Powell Barnett Park in the Central District. Community members not all that happy about this camp regarding sanitation, etc. How this impacts public use of the park as well. I should point out that King County has awarded $2 million to local nonprofits to help, as reported in the Seattle Times, but it's taken a little while to get those funds distributed. David, we've seen a little bit about this. The city's given some money to a hotel in Kent, apparently, to house these asylees. It looks like they might be moving out, but it just makes you wonder, once again, what happens when that money from the city runs out on July 1st and this other money from the county needs to kick in? What do you think?
I mean, that's the whole kind of issue with this crisis that's brewing is there's frankly not any kind of coordinated plan around what to do here. The fact that the main solution to this arrival of asylum seekers has been to house them in a Tukwila church, which is not, I have been down there. It is the woman, Jean Bullerjack, who runs that, is kind of a saint and is doing her part, but she is the first to admit it's not the right place for them. It's crowded. Hygiene is sort of hard to maintain. It's just not fit to hold 3 to 4 to even at times 500 people on that property. But because there has not been, there has been some money and some response to emergency situations like this encampment. It seems like we'll kind of see that again, which is, it's a reaction to a acute problem of people camping in this park. But as far as like the long-term strategy or coordinated plan between the city, the county, the state, it just has not really emerged. And so what happens is you get these kind of last minute, where are they going to go, kind of stressful situations rather than any sort of sustainable and long-term solution to this.
I hear you. And the part that kind of concerns me is the fact that King County has given some money to the Low Income Housing Institute, the Refugee Women's Alliance, and the Riverton Park United Methodist Church, who you mentioned there. And it sounds like they've gotten about $750,000 here to help support housing for these asylum seekers. And it wasn't the original intent, I think, to direct money towards this group of people camping in the park. But that's where I get concerned, because there are more asylum seekers coming. And I'm not saying that warm weather necessarily means this, but it could mean we see more encampments in the park as those conditions are. I don't want to use the word better, but I could see it happening in the future where more of these asylum seekers see this happening. Oh, that can happen in a park. We'll go to another park in another part of the county or the city and see what happens there. I guess that's the piece that I worry about. And I worry about these dollars with these three different agencies getting distributed, I don't know, in any way fairly to the people who are already here or the people who are just coming in. So much of this is a mess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a key point, which is this is not a static issue. This is likely to continue to, people are likely to continue to show up. In fact, we've talked to folks who say that, I would say basically if you talk to any kind of agency working in Seattle, Mary's Place or, some women's shelters, almost all of them are reporting a few families a week arriving, sometimes more than that. Jan in Tukwila says she's turning people away at this point because they're full, but more people continue to arrive and directly from SeaTac Airport.
Right.
And I think you're right. I think the fact that I think the fact that the weather is going to improve here and is improving, it's a nice day today. I think people are going to continue to arrive here. And, this is all sort of connected to this larger national issue, which is that there are other cities like Denver or Boston that have really seen huge numbers of people show up. And so once the word gets out that, maybe Seattle's an option, there's this church up in Seattle that's been housing people. Sure. There are agencies, nonprofits in places like Arizona that we've heard about that are actually suggesting that people come up to Seattle. And it's just, and so, yes, I don't think it's an issue that's going to go away. I will say that I don't think, the people who are sleeping in Powell Barnett Park don't want to be sleeping in Powell Barnett Park.
Of course not. Right. That's the important point.
Prefer housing. But, if there is no housing, I think you're right. I think it's entirely possible that we see more situations like this. I mean, in part because, as we've seen, it's appears to be one of not very many ways to get action from local government. I mean, we're seeing it right now that Seattle is jumping in and trying to shelter these people when they were down in Tukwila sleeping and they were a little bit out of sight, out of mind. That wasn't happening. And so you're right. I think in a system that has not really found its footing yet or any sort of regional coordination, I think sometimes what happens is you kind of force the issue with putting it out in public, and you get neighbors who are upset about it, and then the city or whichever government is kind of forced into doing something.
Yeah, that's what we've seen here. This wasn't really something that the city of Seattle was advertising that they did. We heard about this through the Seattle Times, through some great reporting from Anna Patrick there and some of the work that's been going on with this. But we'll definitely keep an eye on this story. And I did want to keep an eye on another story here. The Seattle City Council working on this week, looking at a transportation levy that has increased in size since Mayor Harrell first brought it up a few weeks ago. So I see your $1.35 billion, and I'm raising you another $100 million to $1.45 billion. That extra money aimed towards bridges, sidewalks, transit corridor improvements, bike safety, and EV chargers. This coming after some polling, roundtables, etc. around the city. The mayor is saying he's being responsive to that. So the owner of a median home would be paying about $17 more per month for this levy compared to the last one. The cost now would be about $41 per month if voters indeed approve this. And David, we have said it before, it's not often Seattleites turn down a levy. Do you think we're getting any closer to that breaking point, that price point with this new transportation levy? $17 more per month. That's not substantial.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I will never predict the failure of a levy until it actually happens. Yeah. That said, their polling looks good as far as what people are willing to support. I'm always a bit skeptical of a polling on initiatives. I have sort of witnessed, when I was at Crosscut, I did some coverage of like the polling that we would do there, and all the initiatives we pulled on looked a lot better a few months out than they actually ended up being on election day. I think when you ask people kind of in the abstract whether they support something, there tends to be a little bit more positive feedback than maybe when they actually go to the ballot box and are reckoning with, do I actually want to pay more in property taxes?
Right.
So, you know, I mean, I do think it's worth hedging a little bit on the polling. That said, you know, I think in some ways this move to add $100 million is sort of a response. You know, of course, we talk about the concerns of how much people are willing to pay, but then there are flip side concerns, which is support from people who want to see the city do more. I think this is kind of a reaction to that, which is, you know, we had the $1.35 billion number, which is big. At the same time, when you factor in inflation and what that actually buys you, it's not actually that much bigger, if any, than what the previous levy was doing. And so I think this is an attempt to put a levy out there that would actually not only continue to do things that the city are doing, but actually speed them up a little bit. I think about sidewalks in particular. You know, when this proposed levy first came out, the proposal was basically continue apace at how much you know, sidewalk repair and additions we're doing.
Right.
This 100 million would actually speed that up a little bit. So, you know, this seems like actually, to me, some evidence that the mayor's office or the city is less concerned about people not supporting it because it's too expensive, and more concerned about people not supporting it because it doesn't do enough.
Fair. And I guess I did want to talk about what the council does next on this. There are certainly a lot of people who were endorsed by the mayor and put in office with his help in some ways. But do you see some changes the council could make here? Meaning, okay, you've got this much money in this bucket. Maybe we move more of that into sidewalks. Is that the kind of math that's going to be going on now? Or what do you see the council tweaking here? I don't think it's going to be a ton, but there could be some of those different changes in terms of where the money is actually allotted, I guess.
Yeah, and my sense is with this levy, so with the Move Seattle levy, you know, I think one thing that people really thought was a failure of that was that it was overly prescriptive, which is that it kind of siloed the money too early on, and then that decreased the city's flexibility to spend it. Of course, the argument in favor of that is you want to tell voters what it is you're actually going to buy with their money that they're giving you. But I think a lot of feeling around the Move Seattle levy was it hamstrung the city a bit too much, making it sort of difficult to deliver on some specific promises. My sense is the philosophy of this levy is to keep it more broad than that already, which would suggest that I think future city councils, if this passes, are going to have, and future mayors, you know, if this passes, will have some flexibility around how they can spend this money, as long as it kind of falls within these broad buckets. You know, that said, we heard from the council that they might be interested to do more on safety, do more on sidewalks. Bridges are a big thing that we keep hearing about, more bridge maintenance. So, I think I'll be interested to know, you know, I don't know that the city council is actually that interested in slimming this down. I suppose it's possible they actually want to add more money to it, which is, you know, city councils are people like adding new things rather than cutting things. So, you know, we'll see how the discussion goes. But, you know, the appetite that we heard yesterday from the city council when they were talking about this it suggested to me that they were looking for what else this levy needs to do rather than how it should be slimmed down.
Fair enough. And I know there's some more slimming down conversations on the way when we're talking about the budget here. So plenty still ahead when it comes to the city council's work on this. All right. Coming up next, what do we got here? We've got an investigation of charges of sexual harassment in the Seattle Police Department. Mayor Harrell has hired an outside firm to look into this. We're going to get some details coming up on Now Hear This. Some big news behind the scenes at the SPD with Mayor Harrell. Last week, he told the city council he is hiring an outside investigator to look into claims of gender discrimination and sexual harassment in the Seattle Police Department. Accountability for police is one of the big 6 standards the mayor's talking about in his new public safety framework. He unveiled this last week at a public safety forum at Garfield High School. He told the group assembled there, when people are impacted by police, the city is listening.
We realized some of our best answers can come from impacted communities, and you are indeed impacted. So we come with a spirit of humility and listening on what we can do better.
Who is impacted here? That is the big question. And David, you wrote about this in the Seattle Times, the mayor hiring Marcella Fleming Reed, who investigates these types of claims. And this after 4 women inside the SPD filed this $5 million tort claim alleging sexual discrimination and harassment by Chief Adrian Diaz and other leaders in the department. The department is saying it welcomes this investigation. That's important to point out. But the SPD has also been pushing back fairly strongly on this tort claim publicly. What kind of fight are we going to see on this issue in the future? How do you see this breaking down?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I think that there's been, I'll say that, there's no shortage of agencies in Seattle that can look into complaints involving the Seattle Police Department. There's the Office of Professional Accountability. There's the Office of Inspector General. To an
CPC.
Extent, there's the Community Police Commission. And then, of course, there's the, court system, which is what's happening now, which is, employees actually filing tort claims.
Right.
So the fact of bringing in another investigator to look into this is interesting. I think in some ways, Seattle, the police department's support of this investigation is telling, which is they feel like the record on this is kind of spun out of control. It's gotten a little muddied. I mean, like you said, there has been some pretty strong pushback, both publicly and then, privately. I think any reporter who has written about this has maybe gotten some correspondence from people within the department who are sort of defending the chief or whatever it might be. And so there's a lot of kind of internal politics, which is all to say, I think this is in some ways kind of a hairy internal politics story of the Seattle Police Department. And I think the hope by Mayor Harrell and, with the support of the Seattle Police Department is that by bringing in an outside investigator, you sort of have this public narrative about what is actually happening and then, go from there. I think in a lot of ways, this is speculation and probably getting a little far ahead of my skis, but I think a lot of ways, the results of that investigation will dictate Chief Diaz's future, I think, or at least will have bearing on that. I know that there are some city council people who are particularly concerned about the reports around how women are treated or promoted within the Seattle Police Department. And so I think for the leadership at the Seattle Police Department going forward, the results of this investigation, I won't say it will make or break their careers, but I will say it's important. We'll just say that much.
No, very much so. And I think the next stage of this is this whole idea of how does this really affect recruiting, which is a big focus for the Seattle City Council right now. We've been talking about that. The department very low on numbers right now, about 900 some odd officers, the lowest amount of officers they've had since the 1990s. I'm just talking about this, and also the SPD's own internal goal of having 30% of the force be women by the year 2030, which is only 6 years from now. Talk to me about those pieces of it, the effect this is going to have on recruiting. In some ways, and I hate to say this just because this is the way justice works in our country, but it almost doesn't matter what these claims are saying and how the court's going to rule on this. This is having an impact on the Seattle Police Department, and I think is going to have an impact on recruiting. I just wanted to get your take on that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because there are two questions here. There's, the question of the tort claim, which is about courts and how that's going to work out. But then there's also just the broader question around how women feel. I mean, it doesn't always have to rise to the level of gender discrimination or sexual harassment. And we know that generally they don't feel great because the Seattle Police Department has commissioned its own report on this, and
30
the
by
results
30
were basically across the board that women didn't feel like they were getting a fair shake in the Seattle Police Department. So again, question of whether there was provable legal liability for gender discrimination is one question. Other question around, do women want to work in the Seattle Police Department? Recent reports and coverage suggest that for a lot of them, the answer is no. And then, of course, it's a small-ish world, the world of law enforcement. So people talk and certain departments, certain reputations. We know that Seattle Police Department's reputation is already struggling for various other reasons. And so layering on the fact that it might be a great place, or at least the perception of that it might not be a great place to be a woman to work. I mean, that certainly doesn't help their efforts to recruit.
No, this is a complicated picture with recruiting here, and I appreciate the back and forth on this, David. But I did want to move on to another story here that I cannot wait for the temperatures to get up towards 80 this weekend. That's going to be incredible. But this really does bring me to another story, a warning from Puget Sound Energy, the state's largest utility, warning customers at some point this summer it could be turning off power in some areas to prevent power lines from sparking wildfires. The areas of highest risk they're outside Seattle. We're talking about places like Cle Elum, parts of Vashon Island, your Skykomishes, your West Thurston counties. But David, this really kind of came across as a wake-up call for me. This is a last resort for the utility. Doesn't want to shut down the service here, but it's a big concern for people who are medically vulnerable, older adults, lower income people who might not have a backup energy source. This is a little scary, and I just wanted to get your take on what you got out of this headline, this story.
Yeah, it feels a little, I wouldn't say apocalyptic, but pre-apocalyptic. I don't know. The fact that the fire conditions is to shut off power to people. I mean, that if you're at that place, then something's not going right. Also, evidence of how much of a drought we're in right now. I mean, I love the fact that it's going to be nice this weekend, and also I think we could probably use a little more rain. So yeah, I mean, California, of course, has been struggling with this for a while. It's sobering, I suppose, that the famously moist Pacific Northwest is also asking these questions.
Yeah, it's almost pre-apocalyptic. Easy for me to say. I think that's a very telling word, because I was just looking at some of the different data on this and the report from the Seattle Times about this. In 2021, Puget Sound Energy really didn't even have a plan for this idea of blackouts, which other states do use, like California here. But PSE has reported this: in between 2000 and 2010, there were 4 fires within 2 miles of PSE infrastructure, and those fires ate up about 650 acres. Since 2011, the number of fires in that range has grown to 19, with over 360,000 acres burned. It's kind of this climate change in real time. Does it come across like that to you, David?
Yeah, it does. There's a lot. I mean, again, I think I've talked about this before. I mean, I grew up here, and I don't remember ever having a smoky summer until maybe 2011. And now I would say it's a coin whether or not we have smog, or I would say more summers than not lately we have. And so, wildfires to me are the kind of number one visceral marker of climate change in a way that we just didn't have before. I know there's a lot of other stuff that might go into forest fires around forest management, and I think that's real. At the end of the day, though, the stark change in just the last 15 years, it's hard to ignore for me.
Yeah, hard to ignore for anybody. I think that's been a sign of the times here in the Puget Sound area for certain. That was indeed something that you'd experience east of the mountains, but not west of the mountains. But when those clouds of smoke come into the Puget Sound Punch Bowl here, they do stick around, and that's an unfortunate part of many summers. And I hope we don't have one of those ahead, but it's not looking great in terms of the drought conditions too. All right, we need to talk about something else coming up here: a boost to the minimum wage in King County. What's that new number? What impact is that going to have? That's right around the corner on What's Next. And a quick shout out to our patrons out there. Please send in your questions. We want to continue the You Ask, We Answer segment. We've gotten a few great questions coming in, but we definitely need some more. Send those questions into Seattle News, Views, and Brews, spell it all out, @gmail.com, and we'll make sure we answer them as quickly as possible. Back to the issue at hand. King County this week working on becoming the first county and 7th jurisdiction in Washington, following SeaTac, Seattle, Tukwila, Bellingham, Renton, and Burien, to set its own minimum wage at a level that would be higher than the state of Washington. Our state's minimum wage right now, $16.28 per hour. So King County is working with some legislation that says, all right, we're going to have $20.29 per hour in these unincorporated areas, which would tie it with Tukwila for the highest in the state. Seattle actually has a lower minimum wage than that at $19.97 per hour. It's not a big sweeping legislation to start here. It would only apply to these unincorporated areas of King County and has lower minimums for the small and medium-sized businesses out there. So important to point that out. But David, I just wanted to touch on this. To see these different jurisdictions making changes to the minimum wage that are different than what the state's doing, what does that say to you?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I mean, I think it maybe is. I wasn't following this super closely. I think it's maybe. It creates some uniformity. I think that's a concern around some minimum wages, which is, it ends at the borders. King County doing this kind of brings a little more consistency between say, Skyway and South Seattle.
Yes.
Those are sort of arbitrary borders when you're actually down there. And so this brings some consistency to that. I also think, this is it's interesting, I think, with the shift in politics in Seattle City Hall, probably point to the King County Council as being the more kind of progressive of the two bodies. And so it doesn't surprise me that this would be one of their first priorities with new members is raising the minimum wage. $15 proved to be good politics. So $20, I think, is probably also they're viewed as good politics. So, like you said, I don't know that it doesn't surprise me all that much. It just kind of brings the surrounding areas more in line with where Seattle is at. Of course, there are going to be the same concerns as always around what that means for local businesses and jobs and things like that. But
Sure.
I think labor demand is high enough that, at least for now, I would be surprised if that many people are offering below $20 an hour to get people to come. So I don't know if it is going to make an immediate difference. We'll see when, if the economy doesn't do as well and there's more supply of labor than there is demand. But for now, I think hiking a minimum wage at a time when it is still kind of difficult for restaurants, et cetera, to hire people who can live here. I don't know that the immediate impact is going to be enormous.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about, though, when you talk about that discrepancy, when one region has a minimum wage that's $3 higher than another. I think that could have an impact. And I wonder if, with this different patchwork of minimum wages out there, how does that affect the job market? Does it pull more people into different areas, or how's that going to lay out? And I know I'm asking you an impossible question here, but what does that look like? And what do other jurisdictions feel the pressure to raise their minimum wages too, I guess?
Yeah, possibly. Again, I mean, I think at the same time, it's more expensive to live in Seattle than it is to live in other places with lower minimum wage. So it might balance out. But at the same time, if you live in a place a lot of people live in a place that's cheaper to live in than commute into Seattle, of course. Maybe this means that, in those unincorporated parts, there's not as much pressure to go to Seattle to work. You could work in the unincorporated parts. But yeah, I mean, I do think that's a complaint from some in the business world, which is this patchwork approach kind of creates kind of migration patterns around the county.
Right.
So.
Yeah, interesting to see how that plays out. And I think a very apt observation there with regard to the different progressive leanings of the King County Council. They got Teresa Mosqueda, and I know she's been pushing for issues like this for many years. And I know that she and Gurmay Zahalai were working on this quite a bit. So interesting to see what happens there. And thank you for the discussion, David. But it is time to wrap up. And I love the way you do baseball research, David. And I know you cull from many different sources, but I thought it was very interesting. And I wanted to see what you found out here. Is it that not only do we have a bunch of Mariners pitchers leading the league in strikeouts? That's a good thing, right? You want your pitchers to be striking out people. But do the batters on the Mariners offense also lead the league in strikeouts? Is that kind of one canceling the other? What are you finding out in your baseball research, my friend?
I haven't learned anything except for that is just seems to be the definition of the Seattle team, which is everybody's striking out. Both the pitchers are striking everybody out and the batters are striking out all the time. I don't know how to feel about it. I wish it was a little more balanced.
Yeah. A lot of swings and misses. We're going to have to do some research on wind speeds around Mariners games this year. There's a lot of fanning going on, that's for sure. Well, David, thank you so much for joining me once again. Thanks to everybody who's listening to this episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks especially to the patrons who support the show. We need you. We really appreciate your help. If you want to be a patron, find this podcast on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen, we are there. And if you listen, again, please consider becoming a patron too. Thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.